pull through much of today's work, as I looked at your agenda for today, has to do with community engagement, right? The idea of organizations reinventing themselves as critical elements of a community landscape. I think that was in some of the materials before you got here. As I was getting ready for today, I thought, well, just for giggles, let's do a Google search on community engagement and arts. 53 million hits I got. I don't know what you would get if you did that. I mean, I spent some time in this world, so maybe I'm a little skewed. But that says to me that we are all, as a field, really struggling to understand what does this mean? How do we truly work in partnership with our communities in a meaningful way? How do we move beyond the education department in the basement doing their thing, but that's not really what we do for cultural practitioners, to really thinking of ourselves as civically engaged? I think there's something to this community thing. I think it's like a climate shift as opposed to a weather shift. So then why am I here? Why did the nice folks at the Indiana Arts Commission ask somebody from Cleveland, a government grant maker from Cleveland, come talk to you about this stuff? Well, I think for a couple of reasons. There.
I was trying to.
Not good. I can space bar with the best. Look, it's Cleveland, right? I think part of the reason I'm here is because our work in Cleveland is getting a lot of attention. Frankly, Cleveland is getting a lot of attention right now. For the first time, and thank you, LeBron James, the National Police is now leading with the river catching fire. And that was 45 years ago. So I'm very delighted that we are getting some momentum. Part of the reason for that is that we are reinventing ourselves in Cleveland, not quite as dramatically as Detroit is, but in a very similar vein. And the story of our agency, the story of public money for arts and culture is a large part of that. The work that I've been privileged to lead for about the past 5 years or so has concentrated on how do you work at the intersection of community need and cultural practice, and how as a grant maker to use the grant maker's tools that you have to help the cultural community begin to navigate these waters, which can be a little challenging and a little tricky. Like the Indiana Arts Commission, we're the public funder. We have to care about connecting the public to the work of cultural institutions. It's an imperative, certainly for us. But I hope by the time we're done here this morning, you will see that this needs to be an imperative for all of us. And I look forward to sharing what we've been learning and give you some practical examples from a couple of institutions. We'll set the stage by talking about our perspective on community engagement, what we think it means, why we think it matters, and then talk through how that's operating on the ground in Cleveland. Two things to remember before I start. Much of what I'm about to say, I think, is pretty universal. Some of it is very specific to the criteria of Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Our criteria and the Indiana Arts Commission's criteria may not be the same. So please do not regurgitate what I have to say in a grant application for Lewis and this. Because that may not be a good strategy for you. It might be, but it might not be. So you are warned, right? And the second thing that I think is always important to say whenever a talking head from another city gets up to talk, all good solutions are local, really. I don't know specifically what's going to work for you and your organization without knowing your community. I can tell you what we're doing and how it's working, but don't think that that is a license or a directive to specifically repeat what we are doing in Cleveland. You know your context. You know how things need to work. So with that, I think we can get to the heart of the matter pretty quickly and sum it up pretty succinctly. Real community engagement is the magic bullet for arts and culture. Finished. Any questions? So of course you should always question anyone who says they have the magic bullet, particularly when they work for the government. But I stand humbly here today and I assert that paying attention to this intersection of community need and cultural practice truly is the magic bullet. It's the thing we're all searching for. If you knew me on a personal level, you would know how much I hate the concept of the magic bullet. They don't exist, and we spend so much energy looking for them everywhere, particularly in nonprofits where the problems can be complex and the solutions are not easy to uncover. I have led my share of nonprofit arts organizations, as you heard, and we were always looking for the answer, capital T, right? The orchestral program that will magically sell out the hall and keep us alive for another day. The thing that will attract the wealthiest, smartest, and most attractive board members to our board and not the other guys. The right way to phrase a grant proposal so that the funder will give us more than we asked for. The capital A answer to the question. And that answer is elusive, isn't it? We look for it everywhere, except perhaps where we should. And that's at home, in our own place. Rocco Landisman, the outspoken and highly effective former chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, talks about place, and he relates it to a concept in wine that the French call terroir. Now, I don't speak French. I buy my wine at Trader Joe's, so I'm kind of in the business talking about this, but the concept is so right on that I have to mention it. The way I understand it, and wine people in the room can nod your heads or telling me I'm nuts, terroir refers to the unique geography, geology, and microclimate of a place that shows up in the grapes that create a good wine. You can taste the ground in the best possible way in a good wine, and it's influenced by everything that happened around it. And Rocco says, and I completely agree, the best art reflects those same sort of local influences. When I talk to you about the magic bullet, I mean being connected to your place, to your community. Thinking about the community that you serve and how you can best serve them authentically to who you are. I don't want you to be someone you're not. With the conditions around you taken to heart. That's the magic bullet. That's what I mean. The challenge, I think, for all of us is the sameness of America these days, right? You drive the interstate highway system between here and Cleveland, certainly, and every exit looks the same. It's the Arby's and the Trader Joe's and the Costco and the whole 9 yards, right? We've homogenized so much of American culture. And though I would never say that we've homogenized arts and culture, I do think that there has been a movement over the last 30 or 40 years to try to build local cultural institutions in the model of those in other places. Why must every orchestra be structured like the New York Philharmonic? Why must every museum be structured like the Museum of Modern Art or the Metropolitan Museum of Art? While it's wonderful to look at those as models, does that take into account the unique microclimate, the geography of place of your city, wherever you happen to be from? If everybody has the same stuff, are we respecting those uniquenesses? Now, in the same talk where Rocco was talking about terroir, he got into deep trouble because he started to suggest that perhaps there were too many nonprofits doing work on the scene, and perhaps there needed to be some thinning of the ranks of cultural nonprofits, and I am not going to go there. But I do think that this concept of connecting to place is important, and it needs to be explored. Before we go too much further, I just threw out a whole bunch of words, and we should make sure we have a shared understanding about what all of them mean. We heard community, we heard serve, and we heard community engagement. So let's take a minute with each of those terms. And let's start with community. One of the best definitions that I've heard lately comes from a group called Alternate Roots. I think they're based in Atlanta. And generally they define community as any group of people with common interests or characteristics defined by place, tradition, intention, or spirit. Place, tradition, intention, or spirit. Sounds like good stuff, right? This also implies that I cannot tell you who your community is. And there is no right answer to the question of who your community is. I can tell you that it is not the same thing as your audience. Your audience is likely a subset of your community, but it's not the same thing. When you look around at the context in which your organization works, who's there? Who are you hoping to reach, whether or not you actually do? Go back to community need. Who needs your help? Realizing that you're an arts organization, you're not a soup kitchen, you're not a homeless shelter. I don't expect you to suddenly become a social service organization, but who needs you? Maybe you run a theater company in a gritty urban neighborhood, and you define the neighborhood as your community, a couple of blocks. Terrific, right answer, that's your community. Maybe you run a renowned museum, and I know you have many of them here in Indianapolis, and you define your community as anybody in the whole state. Okay, you could probably make that case. That sounds like a right answer. Do you see what I'm getting at? Only you can tell us, funders, others, who your community is. And for the trustees in the room, this is your sweet spot, right? The role of a trustee is to operate like a hinge between the organization and the community at large. What better role for trustees than when you're being that hinge to make sure that you're always bringing the community's perspective to the table. All right, we've got community now. I mean, what do we mean by serve? In this context, I think by now you realize I don't mean serve up programs to your audience, right? This is where I just take a moment and I go back, and I think it's always worth remembering this. And when I work with undergraduate students in Cleveland, I'm always surprised that this is a new concept. As 501c3 nonprofit organizations, we actually have service built into what the government asks us to do, right? We are supposed to serve the public interest. If you haven't looked it up lately, look it up. And undergraduates always say to me, oh, I'm a 501c3, so I don't have to pay taxes, and so my donors can get a write-off. No. You get the benefit of being a not-for-profit organization because the system needs something from you. The system needs you to serve the public interest. Serve implies we exist beyond ourselves, right? I don't know if you know the work of Russell Willis Taylor and National Art Strategies for arts practitioners in the room. If they're giving a workshop, go. They're some of the best around that I've seen. She said in an address to Arts Midwest a couple of years ago, in talking about service, she said, arts leaders and artists, in my view, have to ask themselves every day, not just how we're doing, but for whom we are doing our work. Not just how, but for whom. And some will say, and I've had this conversation with many an artistic director, that our job is to serve the art form. While I don't disagree, I think that is an incomplete idea. Asking for whom implies that we understand that as artists and practitioners, we're the conduit, not the endpoint, that our job is to facilitate an artistic journey, not simply to provide a destination. So, I think we covered community. I think you see where I'm going with service. So what is this community engagement thing that everybody's so pumped up about? Why did I find 53 billion hits on Google when I looked at this morning? And I will tell you, I once overheard an esteemed arts leader in talking about community engagement say to a room full of us, sort of in a whisper, yeah, well, we used to call it community outreach, but we heard that was bad, so we call it engagement now. Who's heard that? Who's heard that someplace? Yes, there's some hands, right? Don't be shy. You hear it all the time. Folks, this is not about nomenclature. This is not about what we call it. This is about who we are and what we do, but don't lose heart. Large, small organizations, there are a lot of people trying to figure out what this is. This is something fundamental. Community engagement is place-based, unique, different for each of our microclimates, but with some common elements. I can tell you the best definition I've heard about this stuff in a while actually comes from our Cleveland Museum of Art, an ivory tower institution for sure, a 100-year-old institution with a big old endowment, a wonderful collection, and an institution for many years that was considered to be completely and utterly separate from the rest of the community, despite being located in the city of Cleveland, in our museum district, and despite having free admission. Definitely the museum paradigm of old, well, we're free, why don't they come, right? This happens in lots and lots of places, and I'm not criticizing them. It was more of the time than it is of where they are today. They have been on this journey, partly because they just finished a $350 million renovation where the museum ended up closed for a while, so they had to reinvent themselves in a new kind of way, partly because they began to realize through that process that they needed to reintroduce themselves to the community. And they have found some very interesting ways to do it. They make a distinct distinction between community programs and community engagement. So what is that? Here's my vineyard that I forgot to show you. Sorry, isn't that lovely? It's in France. As an aside, we had an event in Cleveland last night that didn't start till it got dark, so I didn't get in the car to come here till a little bit late. So I've had some coffee, but forgive me if I stray a little bit. It is sleep-induced, or lack of sleep-induced. Community programs, community engagement, two different concepts, right? Community programs, what are they? We all do them. They are immensely important to our day-to-day work. At the museum, this is the yellow school bus field trips, right, that area students take. This is a local parade. Parade the Circle is what it's called, where everybody comes and they do a wonderful community gathering in their neighborhood. A chalk festival, those kind of things. You know what your community programs are, and what are the characteristics of them. They are program-based partnerships. They are meant to build audiences by marketing existing services to new people. Community programs are a terrific short-term marketing strategy. They're focused internally. They're asking the question, how can the community serve us by coming to our programs? And they are important on-ramps to lots of different people to have a good experience in your institution, or in this case at the museum. And I would never suggest, and the museum doesn't suggest, that they're not important. They are very, very important. But ladies and gentlemen, that right there, that's not community engagement. That's not our magic bullet. That's being a good nonprofit and having a best practice marketing strategy. Community engagement looks different. They have been very deliberate at the museum about separating these two things in their mind, and I think the way they've articulated it is really useful. When they talk about engagement, they are talking about long-term work. They are talking about organizational development level work, the entire institution, not the marketing department, not the education people who get stuck in the basement. It's the work of building community ownership, participation, and building relationships. What else does that sound like? It sounds like fundraising, right? It sounds like a great development strategy. It is absolutely organization-wide. Community engagement work goes beyond a programmatic partnership, and it goes beyond the art, whatever art it is that you make. It means having this external focus and building partnerships that go beyond selling tickets to your next thing, whatever your next thing is. It's a relationship with the community. It takes a really long time, but also asks how you can serve the community in that unique microclimate kind of way. Service again, huh? Maybe we're onto something. Part of this process the museum went through when they were thinking about community engagement was they actually did what they called a community engagement 360. Are we familiar with the 360 evaluation in the HR world, right? Where you're getting lots of people to look at you from different angles. So they did this at an organizational level with all of their senior team, with many of their trustees, and then with lots and lots of voices from the community. They wanted to hear what the community truly thought of the museum before they launched a strategy to think differently about how they engage. And I will tell you, what they heard was not easy to hear. I was in a session, something to know about Cleveland. University Circle, where the museums are, is a lovely, quiet, non-urban, very institutional neighborhood. It's where the Cleveland Clinic is located, kind of. It's where Case Western Reserve University is located. It is surrounded by some of Cleveland's historic African-American neighborhoods that are also neighborhoods of extraordinary poverty that have been that way for 50 years, right? We're talking about kids who get all their meals at school because they're not eating at home, that kind of thing. And they're surrounded, literally. Some people are within half a mile walking distance, less than that. And the museum has always wondered, like, how do we really engage our neighbors? Why aren't they participating with us? And so through this session, they put on their Dumbo-sized listening ears and went and listened to people in the community. And I was at a session with a local partner who screwed up her courage, and I give her so much credit for saying this. And she said to the museum of one of their community programs, you come and you bring your program to us, and you bring your people, and you teach us things, and it's wonderful. But you assume we have no talents to share with you. And the deputy director of the museum was sitting there, and I watched his eyes go, because he hadn't ever thought of it that way. Have you thought about the talents of the community that they could share with you? That's what this engagement stuff gets at. So, are you with me? We've got a community definition now. We're talking about service. We're talking about place. We're talking about engagement in a different way. So now here comes the most important question that anybody should ever ask in a presentation like this. So what? Why does this matter? Do we need to be perceived as critical elements of our community landscape? Isn't that what the community development people are supposed to do? And this magic bullet stuff, isn't a magic bullet $1 million gift? Like, why should I spend energy thinking about this stuff? I have to run a nonprofit, I don't have enough resources, I don't have enough staff. I am with you. I am with you, I understand. But this mindset shift is we at CAC anyway, critically important. And here's one reason that one piece of evidence I think that backs it up. And you all know this, but I want you to look at it from a different way. I don't think anybody in the room here would question the statement that cultural participation has changed dramatically in the last 20 years, and it continues to change at an accelerated pace. I'm sure you all looked at the NEA statistics that came out, I think last year from 2012 on cultural participation. Audiences for traditional art forms have declined precipitously, right? We know these numbers. Ballet attendance down 31% in the period 2002 to 2012. Opera down 34%. Classical music down 24%. Other than ballet down 17%. What that means is 2/3 of adults nationwide did not attend an arts and culture event of the type typically produced by most of you. But at the same time, there's a real opportunity here, right? Because there is robust cultural activity taking place outside those nonprofit cultural institutions, at the community level, online, in public spaces of various kinds. Demand for active participation in the arts is going up across demographic groups. And in 2012, fully half of all adults that they surveyed through this instrument did some sort of participatory art making in that particular year. So what does that mean to this magic bullet question? It means the intersection of community need and what cultural practice looks like is shifting. It is a wake-up call. Our community is telling us something about what they expect and the relationship they want to have with us. You don't recognize our talents. Are we listening? Can we afford not to listen? Trustees in the room, again, I appeal to you in your hinge mode. If you remember nothing else today, remember the lady who sat here with fish arms doing the hinge, right? Have you asked this question as a trustee? How are we listening to the input of the community around me? Now, quick caveat, especially for those who are thinking, my artistic director is never going to go for this. You're telling me we have to do popsicle stick art instead of X, Y, and Z. No, I'm not. Do what you do at the level of excellence at which you operate every single day. But can you do that? Also, by listening to and with your community, such that they will be connected to your work in a meaningful way. So that's enough theory now, right? Let me tell you a little bit specifically about what our grant-making agency does and how we are trying to influence this conversation. And then I'm hoping to leave just a couple of minutes for questions before we send you into the rest of your day. And in order to do that, you have to know just a little bit about us. We're the public arts grant maker for our county. We have a dedicated arts tax where we are, and it's a cigarette tax, and it generates kind of a lot of money, $15 million or so a year that we can only put into arts and cultural institutions. Dedicated arts taxes are a different conversation. Tom Shorble, the former head of an Indiana Arts Commission, is one of the guys who was responsible for that, and I'm sure he would come and tell you all about that anytime you'd like to hear. That's not today's talk, but that's our context. We have some real money. But look at what this slide says about what we do. We make grants, operating support, blah, blah, blah. Okay, all of that's important. But you see that little cloud at the top? Who are the constituents of a public grant maker? They are not simply the organizations that we fund. They are the residents of our community, especially given that they're the ones who voted for this tax in the first place. We need, and our mission is about strengthening the community through the grants that we make. And so as we're talking about this reinvention, as we look at the rebirth of Cleveland and we think about what role can the arts play in that, how can we truly have a substantive role? We have one tool as a grant maker, which is our grant process. So what do we do to shift the focus in our organization? 45% of your score from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, we work like the Arts Commission, right? There's a panel, and there's an application, and there's a score, and it's complicated and all of that. So it's very similar to your process here. Our criteria, and the most important thing you have to demonstrate to us beyond anything else, is how you connect to your community. Public value, and we say public value for us means how you engage your community in service to your mission. You gotta tell us who your community is, you gotta tell us what you're doing to engage them, you gotta tell us how that works to make your mission happen. We are not gonna tell you exactly what that should look like. You need to help us understand how you do it. We also find that this is a really challenging question for so many organizations to begin to answer. And it's challenging, right, because you're doing this every day, but you're not used to talking about your work this way. You're used to talking about the artistic excellence. You're used to talking about the programs and the curatorial staff and all of those kinds of things. And we are asking you to talk about relationships, talk about that organizational development level stuff like they do at the Cleveland Museum of Art when they talk community engagement, and it's tough. So we're lucky, we fund all kinds of organizations. There are some of them, it looks like your places, we fund nature and science and those things too. All of these organizations have struggled with this public value concept. And so we've engaged some experts to help us. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Holly Sidford of the Helicon Collaborative, which is based in New York and San Francisco, and also, I don't know why we're moving ahead, but that's all right, you can see that if you like. There they are. Holly Sidford and Nick Rabkin have been helping us dive into this public value question. What does it mean? How is it generated? How can you influence people to create more of it? Why does it matter? We're going to be rolling out a study that they did for us at the Grant Makers in the Arts Conference in Houston in a couple of months, actually in October. And we'll be glad to share with you everything that we've learned. One of the things that they have pulled out as a challenge, that I'm sure you all realize is a challenge, is that the kind of organizations that do the work that you do fall into a couple of buckets. There are the organizations who are dedicated to serving the art form. Sometimes we call these the legacy organizations in our community, but that sounds a little disparaging and I don't want it to. And then there are the organizations that are more community-based. They're thinking, it's not that they're not thinking about the art form, but they're thinking about the community first. And what becomes easy when you listen to someone like me talk is, oh crap, that woman is telling me that we can't focus on artistic excellence. We have to do more programs that will engage more people. That's not who we are, that's not what we care about. Thankfully for you, what Holly and Nick have found is that there are great ways to produce and connect with the public and produce more public value in organizations of both types. And so we will continue to talk with everyone and with our constituents about what that looks like. Holly has also written a terrific paper. If you haven't seen it, Google Holly Sidford Bright Spots. Back in 2009, under the auspices of the Paul G. Allen Foundation at West, she did an in-depth study. The Paul G. Allen Foundation wanted to know, okay, it's the economic downturn, who is managing through this scary time without extraordinary resources? And what are the characteristics, if any, in common of those organizations? And they dug in and they found, yes, indeed, there are plenty of organizations who are managing, maybe not well, but managing enough, without million-dollar endowments or a Rockefeller on their board. And what is in common with all of those things? It's a wonderful, simple framework that has the mnemonic ADEPT. She calls it the ADEPT framework. But listen to the 5 common sort of key characteristics of successful organizations. They have an animating purpose. In other words, they know who they are. Listen to the D. They are deeply engaged with their communities. They see themselves as civic players on the landscape, not simply organizations providing a service, but rather interconnected with the work of a community. The third one is about evaluation and data. The fourth is about plasticity. Are you flexible? Can you flex and move? And some large cultural organizations, that's a real question. And then the T in the model is transparency of leadership, of governance. How do you get everybody working together? There are critical success factors for cultural organizations in today's climate, which we know is challenging. And one of them is this deep engagement with community. We brought Holly to town to do workshopping, to do a day-long learning session, much like this one with our cultural organizations. This additional study that we're doing is another way that we as a grant maker can try to influence some of this conversation. Our cultural partners, which is what we call our grantees, they do this every day way better than we do, because our verb is not do, our verb is support as a funder, right? And so we are working with places as diverse as Cleveland Public Theater, which is doing work with, there's a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. And so rather than ignore these guys who are sort of shuffling by the theater and making it uncomfortable for their patrons, they invited them in. And now there's a theater program every year that works with guys who are homeless and struggling with addiction, where they create their own play, and they take it on a road show. And you guys have a theater company, I'm sure, that does stuff like this. It is deeply meaningful, not only artistically and pushes the artistic edge, but it's meaningful to the community. I could go on and on and on. You know, think now as I'm talking about what is going on where you live, where people are operating at this intersection of community need and artistic practice. The reason I was up so late last night is the other thing that we're doing to try to help spark this conversation. We know that sometimes as a funder, the best thing we can do is to provide money for groups to take a risk, to try something, especially in this area of community engagement, because we know you gotta be risk averse when you run a nonprofit. One show that doesn't pay off could close you down, right? I've been there, I know what that looks like. So because we know about this fragility, we launched a crowdsourced grant making program a couple of years ago, and we said, go be creative, do it in partnership with others. We modeled it on the Night Arts Challenge, and you know that out of Miami and Detroit and other places. Simple application. The public voted, so we got lots of people paying attention, which is helpful for somebody who's voter supported, right? And it was a tremendous, tremendous success. Come to Cleveland in the next few days, and you will see, the gay games are in town, so we've got like all kinds of hoopla because of that, which is wonderful. But Land Studio, who does public art and other things, pulled together this amazing light installation that is activating people in ways that I never would have imagined. Our $150,000 grant attracted $350,000 worth of additional investment, which is tremendous. But the thing that relates to today's conversation is that they're doing all of this partnership with regular folks, in partnership with people who are trustees of our wonderful museums and our orchestra, and in partnership with people who have never darkened the door of a cultural organization before, and now they feel empowered because they feel like they are part of the solution in a really meaningful way. So let me wrap up so we can get to a couple of questions before you all move on. I hope, as you've been listening to me ramble here, you've got a couple of nuggets that you're going to listen for as you work through the professional development of the rest of the day. I hope you are thinking about your role as a civic institution beyond being a wonderful arts organization, and think about how that might help you with financial sustainability. I know there's a money session later today. How does having a deep, engaged relationship with the community help your bottom line? I posit that it does. I encourage you to think about that today. For the trustees who are here, I hope you embrace some of the challenging things that you heard me say, and this idea of this adept model for success, and think always as a trustee about the organizational issue. What's the institutional issue here? Not the marketing question that's in front of us, not the fundraising question that's in front of us, but from a perspective of the entire organization. Are we listening? Are we thinking together with our community? And if it helps, go back to thinking about community engagement as the magic bullet, the thing that is going to help us ensure that our work is relevant to the place in which we do it and the people for whom we do it. Because we got to change, right? We can't sit still. This is from the guy one of the co-founders of Fast Company, who says, change happens when the cost of the status quo is greater than the risk of change. Right now, I think the cost of the status quo is pretty high unless you happen to have a Rockefeller family member on your board. You need money from the community, and you need to make your case to the community every day about why they should care about you. You also need to show that you care about them, right? And for the trustees in the room, this status quo thing is often what the game of governance looks like. It's the governance relay. Here, don't drop the baton, keep doing the same thing. Here, now you take it, don't drop the baton. I don't want to go out of business on my watch, and I'm a trustee too, and I'm just as guilty of this as anyone. But remember, the status quo might cost more than actually taking the risk and making some change. But I'm going to leave you with this. Why else should we do this? We got to do this work of community engagement for this guy and his little buddy, right? We got to do it for these guys because this guy deserves the chance to experience the joy and the wonder that the arts can bring. And I want all of you to succeed so that he can. Thank you for listening. I'd be happy to take a question or two. I know that we're right at time, so I'll look to the presenter.